Okay, this is a sermon for November the 1st, 2020. Quick review. It's on social justice, and quite frankly, what does social justice mean? Nobel laureate Friedrich Hayek said in 1976, quote, "I have come to feel strongly that the greatest service I can still render my fellow man would be that I could make the speakers and writers among them thoroughly ashamed ever again to employ the term social justice," unquote. Well, 44 years later, we're still using the term. So why was Hayek so opposed to the term social justice? Well, I think it's kind of like this. If you went to a food establishment and you ordered a meal and they brought you a kid's meal, would you protest? Would you say, hey, this is not what I ordered? Well, of course you would. That's the problem I feel that we're facing here with social justice. Once you put a qualifier in front of the word justice, you've just changed what justice means. And if we get social justice, we're going to holler and say, this is not what I ordered. Well, social justice and justice, they're two different things. This is what we understand justice to be. It's identified in Lady Justice. You know, and there are three items here that I want us to focus on. First is the blindfold. The blindfold represents the impartial nature of justice. When we think of Deuteronomy 16:19, you shall not distort justice, you shall not be partial, you shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. Impartiality. Social justice is very partial. It's partial to the poor, it's partial to the minorities, it's partial to the less privileged. Social justice tries to take up former injustice by unbalancing the scales, and that's a second part that we want to notice on, is that notice the scales. The punishment must fit the crime. Social justice tries to make up for former injustices that are sometimes hundreds of years old. Now, if we were dealing with the same individuals who suffered the injustice and who caused the suffering, that would be different. But when justice becomes a tool to manipulate the society to produce a certain political outcome, people become pawns and lives are ruined. This is not justice. And then lastly, the sword. Justice has final say. And this is why you don't want social justice, because the consequences of tinkering with justice is injustice. And if your justice is unjust, there's no remedy. There's no appeal to a higher court. Now, you say, that's not social. Social justice is really about justice. Well, then you would disagree with the United Nations. Because this is what the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs has to say. Present-day believers in absolute truth, identified with virtue and justice, are neither willing nor desirable companions for the defenders of social justice. Now, what you understand to be justice, that is not social justice. They are not desirable companions. It's all about redistributing the wealth. Social justice is not possible without strong and coherent redistributive policies conceived and implemented by public agencies. Okay? You don't want this. This is not just. Why do I say this? Well, first of all, Scripture commands us in Deuteronomy 16, it says, justice and only justice shall pursue. Forget social outcomes. We pursue justice. The social outcomes might be a bit sloppy, but justice is so hard to come by. You must stay totally focused on it. Because if you're trying to produce outcomes, you're going to pervert justice, as we will see by other scriptural exhortations. Pursuing social outcomes will pervert justice. You cannot manipulate outcomes without manipulating justice. And we know that manipulating the outcomes in science is bad science. Well, I believe manipulating the outcomes for society should be considered bad sociology. So what does pursuing justice and only justice, well, what does that look like? Well, Scripture tells us you shall not do injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great. You know, justice is supposed to be the place where everybody is on the equal footing. The rich, the poor, black, white, men, women, doesn't matter. Okay? The whole point here is justice is blind. It doesn't ask you what your skin color is or how much you make. Now, we're not told why we're not to give preferential treatment to the poor, other than maybe the exhortation that is given a little later in verse 18, where it says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Most of us don't like to be patronized or to receive special treatment. So, how do you pursue justice? Don't be partial. But there's a second exhortation that Scripture gives us, which is very helpful. You shall not follow the crowd in wrongdoing. When you testify in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. Do not show favoritism to a poor man in his lawsuit. You know, envy is a real problem, and it's something that we have to deal with in our human nature. Envy can be murderous, and it is easy to whip a crowd into a movement to increase your power base. All you have to do, find yourself a victim that can help you with your cause, and then promote your cause. Don't take the time to find out if a policeman was actually racist or not. Who cares if he's racist or not? It's not about the person. It's about the cause. That's what it means to follow a crowd. And there are people who are politically motivated who will do that. Scripture says, if you want justice, don't follow the crowd. It's a way that you produce injustice. So what can we learn? Well, first of all, we need to not use the term social justice. And when you hear the term used, you need to probably ask the question, okay, now are you talking about social justice or are you talking about justice? Because they're not the same thing. And you need to let people know they're not the same thing. Okay? Second, we need to encourage, but we don't need to enslave. You know, people need people. And we need encouragement from one another, but don't want to be the person who needs people to need you. If you're a person who needs people to need you, you are a person who will enslave. And that'll be a real source of injustice. Okay? Don't be that person. Let people stand on their own 2 feet. 2, do the work of sorting it out. Collective punishment can be very unjust. Now, the next sermon we're going to have is going to deal a lot more on collective punishment. But the point, justice is not a group activity. Justice is one individual at a time. You can't have justice for a group. You can only have justice for individuals. And if you don't do the hard work of sorting it out, I mean, in any trial, you have to, first of all, decide, okay, what did the defendant do? And what did the propagator do? And you judge them separately. You separate their courses of action. And if people did things wrong, you sort it out. It's like when you have your kids come to you and they're caught up in a fight. And you want to side with one kid because you know the other kid is always causing trouble. you just can't do that. You have to take the time to sort it out. And maybe the favored child did do something that's wrong. Well, they need to be judged based on what they did. And then the kid that's the ornery kid that did something wrong, his judgment needs to be based on what he did. And so in any case, you usually have two judgments, two separate judgments that you have to render, not just one. And then we just need to remember, Jesus is the great equalizer. Point people to Jesus. The ground at the cross is all level. We all need to be forgiven, so we all need to forgive. And pointing people to Jesus is the solution here. So here's the review. I hope this helps. Again, these are important subjects that our culture is talking about right now, and our families need to think this through, because our culture is not going to influence them in the right direction. We need to influence culture back towards scriptural truth. God bless you.